Hey, this is Christopher Glennon, aka C2, and if you're in the market for a newer used vehicle, give me a call at 619-368-5550. I work at Kearney Mesa Dodge Jeep and Ram and have access to over 500 new vehicles as well as over 600 used. I look forward to hearing from you. Hey, I'm Christopher Glennon over at Kearney Mesa Dodge Jeep and Ram, and this is the brand new 2024 Dodge Hornet RT. It is an electric plug-in hybrid, so you do have the benefits of both gas and electric. Come get yours today.
I'm C1.
And I'm C2.
And this is
The Christopher Show.
Today you'll notice we're drinking coffee. We changed it up a little bit just to have something different to drink.
Yeah, I mean...
That and coffee is one of my favorite things anyway. You have Monster, I think.
I have Monster in my cup, but,
So
it's
anyway,
my generation's coffee.
I know, right? It kind of is. That you guys got to cut that out.
Yeah,
Black coffee's better.
Yeah, but there's not enough caffeine in there.
Yeah, there is. All right. So anyway, let's go ahead and start today. As we said on the last show, we started to go a little political because there's a lot going on, especially with the election coming up and everything. We want to be able to address these topics and have our voice be heard about these topics. I know our audience is still growing, but all the same, I'd like to be able to have clips that we can show some of our viewers on Instagram, on Twitter, and on Facebook, like different things they can see. Today, I want to talk about Trump. I want to talk about election interference. I want to talk about how the cases are election interference, but I also want to talk about the ballot removal.
Yeah, no, it's definitely election interference, and it's a travesty to see how they're trying to disenfranchise the American people.
50% of the population. Basically, anytime, and I've told you this with an election, they talk about, Biden won in a landslide. There were 74 million people that voted for Trump. And let's say he legitimately got 81 million, okay? So you're still looking at 81 million versus 74 million. You're still looking at about 52% to 48% of the population, which means you still have almost 50% of the population that is represented by President Trump.
Yep.
And they want to disenfranchise, and more than that, they want to vilify and call them extremist.
Yep.
You can't call 50% of your nation extremist. You can call 50% of your nation, if they have someone that you think is a terrible person representing them, and you know me, I try to be fair about both of them. I don't agree with everything Trump says. I don't like the way he speaks sometimes, but his policies are the things that I absolutely endorse and I condone. But I see them railroading this man. I mean, he has been president. Even before he took office, they were already starting the Russian collusion thing.
Yep.
They started the narrative that vilified him. If anything, that is a type of insurrection, because that story, that narrative, got pushed by every media outlet to undermine a sitting president. It didn't undermine someone that wasn't president. Hillary Clinton continued. They talk about the smooth transition of power and all of that. They continued to deny him as the legitimate president.
Yeah.
Obama didn't go away. He was still trying to undermine him even after Trump took office, like several times speaking out against him. Like, they talk about the smooth transition of power. They didn't do it.
Nope.
But they absolutely expected Republicans to do it. And on January 6th, we can address that. Actually, let's address one more thing before we start talking about the cases, because we're going to get into the cases on this episode. But the gag orders that are coming out. So tell us what a gag order is.
So basically, he's not allowed to speak or defend himself to the public view. It is basically not classified, but it's almost classified in the court's case, where they don't want the public to hear anything else that he has to say or try to defend himself.
Correct. So what they're trying to do is to get him to stop telling his side of the story in the media, but they have no problem with Fani Willis, with Letitia James, with Alvin Bragg, with Jack Smith going before the media and telling their version of why they're prosecuting him.
Yep.
So they're like, we're going to tell our version, but we don't want Trump to tell his version, because if you start having that happen, all of a sudden people start giving calls to our offices and threatening our lives. Well, maybe you should consider what you're doing that's prompting that, because Trump's definitely not. I have never heard Trump once say, hey, call them and threaten them.
Not only that, I mean, you have other business people now pulling out of New York because of how they're going after Trump like this. Like with
that's one of the cases. Let's
okay,
put that on the shelf for just a minute, because let's talk about, I still want to focus on this part of it, and then I'll let you speak on that in a moment.
Yeah.
So, but you can't railroad somebody like this, and you can't frickin' steamroll them like this. I mean, that's what they're literally doing. Yep. Let's go back to the gag order, and then we'll come to that. You're talking about businesses withdrawing. I absolutely want to get into that in a moment.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the gag thing. It takes the scales of justice and tips them so far this way that Trump looks guilty in the media, and that's exactly what they did with Russian collusion. They convicted him before they ever had any evidence. And then once the Mueller report came out, guess what? It showed that there was no collusion, but guess what happened? Democrats still strongly believe that there was Russian collusion. They're like, there's evidence. He was never found innocent. He wasn't exonerated. The same things go with the impeachments. Once he was found innocent, they once again tipped the scales of justice so far that people still believe him guilty. They don't believe he was exonerated. They don't believe that he was relinquished of that responsibility.
Yep.
So let's go ahead and jump into the Letitia James case. I'll let you start with that because we're talking about the New York business, but please start by telling us what happened with that case instead of starting in the middle.
Well, I mean, basically like you said, they're trying to railroad him. I know you know a lot more about exactly the details inside of it, what happened and whatnot, but I mean, they're not letting his lawyers bring up certain points. They're not letting the
It's already been ruled on now.
Well, yeah, but what I mean was that they didn't let the lawyers bring up certain points, bring up certain people, bring up the banks that were like, no, he was fine. There was no issue here.
So let me summarize what happened with the case. Basically, Trump was tried for inflating the value of his properties. We saw where Judge Engoron tried to tell him what Mar-a-Lago is worth. Judge Engoron's area of expertise is not real estate.
Nope.
The other thing is, this was a non-jury trial. Let's start with that thing. That's the very first step in railroading someone, is making sure that they can't request a jury trial. Letitia James scrubbed the law to find the one thing that she could prosecute Trump on that only a judge could determine guilt or innocence. And it was a very arbitrary thing. It's a law that has only been used, I think, 14 times, and there were actual victims. And I mean, since in the 50 years that it's been in existence, it's only been used about 14 times. And there were actual victims. There are no victims in here. There's nobody that's been defrauded.
Nope.
On top of that, they go through the case. They put the gag order on Trump, a partial gag order, so that they're not getting threats or whatever. Here's my thing. That doesn't stop the threats from coming. If anything, it only amplifies, because anybody that now sees the injustice you were doing initially, they're going to be more pissed off, and so you're going to get more. So anyway, Letitia James prosecutes him. And it's a civil judgment. It's not a criminal judgment, because supposedly in the criminal judgment, he was already found guilty.
Yeah.
It's a misdemeanor or something like that, but all the same. So she starts with a $250 million fine that she's seeking. During the course of the trial, she bumps it up to $350 million. Then she gets to tack on interest and all of that. So now you're looking at like $400 million for this case. He's in the middle of an election where he needs all of the campaign funds he can possibly have. This isn't about what he stated on some income tax, on some loan application for what he thinks his property values. And I'll tell you some of the stuff that happened in the case about that in a minute. This is about locking up his money so that he can't use it toward his campaign.
Yep.
So in the case, what they had said, not what they had said, let me go with this. What the banks said is that there was no fraud created.
Yep.
They said we weren't frauded. We were paid every payment. And on top of that, we were paid early. We were paid our interest. So we got what we expected to get out of the loan, and we loaned to him based on what he had put forth, but there's a disclaimer also, and we're supposed to do our homework. An accountant, I think from Harvard or Yale, I think it's Harvard, went in and said there are no accounting fraudulent things here. There's one thing that's an error, but that's more like an accounting error. It's not even fraudulent. It's just an accounting error. So he said there might be one error, but it's not fraud by that statute or by that standard.
Yeah.
And so so to get to the case, Trump's convicted of or found to be liable, rather. Let's make sure we use the right legal terminology. Found to be liable to the amount of $350 million plus, which again, after all the interest and everything, comes to $400 million. He has to put up a bond of $500,000 now, just so that he can have his case appealed. Which now, again, their goal is to lock his money up.
Yep.
It's not necessarily to get the money out of him, because this case unethical.
Yep.
He got railroaded. I think that even if he gets found liable in the appellate court, that I think he still gets one more appeal. So there's still a couple of appeals, but to make him pay that fine is about locking up his money.
Exactly. And that's where you start to, and like we've said before, disenfranchise people, because now he's no longer able to actually campaign properly the way he should be able to, the way that Joe Biden's going to.
Well, and you were trying to get to a point about the businesses that are talking about leaving New York. So he's found, here's the even bigger picture. Let's zoom out even more. As a business, he has done what every other real estate agent, and you can ask, Mr. Wonderful said this, but every real estate agent knows that when you're doing commercial real estate, you try to get as much for your property as you can in your statements. It is the bank's responsibility, especially because it's laid out in the disclaimer that, hey, you should verify this. If you have a problem with what I've stated, come back to me and tell me, and we can negotiate what the value really is.
Yeah.
This is the basis of having this much in assets, and the common person can't comprehend this because they have assets like a car and a computer.
Well, that's the thing is also, I mean, some people, when they're buying a car, they don't know it because they don't get asked it. But sometimes banks will ask you for a proof of income. They want to see your bank statement that you are making X, what you say you are making. So they're again seeking proof. They're doing their due diligence to make sure that the loan is, accurate.
Yeah, and they're looking at income. Most people don't have to state their assets.
Yep.
Trump has to state his assets because he's going at commercial property. And so they need to know that, hey, you're levying this asset for this property or these assets for this property.
Yep. Which
assets are you levying? Oh, okay, so what do you estimate those to be worth? The bank had no problem with this, man. They were doing business with him all day long because they know. And here's something. I've read J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan said he didn't just lend based on your ability to pay. He lent based on your reputation as an individual. And with the reputation Trump had and his income and his assets, they said, hey, when I look at the holistic picture, you're someone that I deem trustworthy to give this loan to. So I'm going to give the loan to you. And people want to point back to his bankruptcies and all of that. Well, if a bank, here's the thing, banks are putting experts on each situation to analyze and assess. I forget what they're called at the moment, but anyway, they analyze and assess the assets. And so do you think the common person is more suited to do that job than the people at these banks like Deutsche Bank that do that stuff?
Yeah.
So that's my problem. And so with that, to your point now, I'll let you speak about businesses that are,
yeah, I mean,
how they see this ruling.
Businesses are seeing it as technically a scare or a fear now to do business in New York because, hey, this is what Trump did. That's exactly what I've done. I'm going to take my business elsewhere and get out of this state because I don't want them coming after me. Kevin O'Leary said it, Mr. Wonderful, like you said. I know that I saw someone else had done it, but I can't recall his name at the moment. But it's just that banks are now leaving the state of New York because they don't want to be tried for the same exact thing and then be found liable.
Well, and let's say this. Letitia James fabricated that there was a fraud committed to the average citizen in New York. The real fraud is prosecuting this case and the loss of investment to New York because you have trillions of dollars that have been invested in New York over the course of several decades because of Trump and his business, but not just because of him, but because of these other people like Mr. Wonderful and the other people from Shark Tank that have real estate there. There's one lady off of Shark Tank that does real estate as well. I can't think of her name.
Barbara?
Yeah, I think it's Barbara. But you have all these people that do real estate there, and now they go, whoa, I know that I did that stuff on my property values as well. How much am I liable for? How much am I on the hook for? So now the real fraud to investors, or I'm sorry, to the citizens, is that they're going to lose a lot of business and a lot of business development and technology because of this. And it's a threat to New York at this point, I would say. And those businesses from New York are going to go incorporate in other states. Florida will be one of those because they're business friendly. Yep. Texas is another one of those. You may see a migration of businesses from New York
in California
to Texas and Florida. Oh, no, not California.
Well, I mean, didn't Elon Musk also
they're not
move
coming here.
to?
Oh, they're leaving California.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Clarify that.
Clarify. From New York and California to Texas and Florida, because I believe that Elon Musk even left California and he's now in Texas.
I think he's over near Austin or something.
Yeah.
But you're right. He's moving his own corporation as well to defend his businesses because it makes no sense to give up a huge part of your business for that kind of stuff. So the Letitia James case, it definitely has hit a big milestone in terms of a lack of confidence by investors in New York. They're afraid. And if you want evidence of that, Letitia James just prosecuted or decided she's going to prosecute a beef company for climate change. Basically going to prosecute, like she's literally making shit up. Like, oh, I'm going to prosecute the beef company for being responsible for climate change and everything they've done to damage the climate in New York. I don't know if you know this or not, but there's a lot of factories in there are a lot of factories in New York. You're going to have to go after every single one of them. What are you really trying to do? And here's what I see that doing. It undermines democracy.
Yep.
It undermines freedom. It reeks of communism and the transition of private assets to government assets. I'm not even going to say public assets because whoever's in government controls those assets. And while we would like to think we have control of our funds, we really don't. Look at Ukraine if you want to talk about that. Yeah. And our money that goes to Israel and Ukraine to support wars that not necessarily all of us support. Yeah. So, and I'm not saying I don't support Israel. I'm going to be very careful about that. That's a Hamas versus Israel war. I see it as a local conflict between those two, and they need to resolve that. But we send a lot of money overseas for wars, and we don't have control over that. So when New York is taking money from corporations, the citizens don't have control of that either. they don't know where that fund's going to go. They don't know if it's going to support something they believe in or not.
Yep.
So anyway, that's the Letitia James case. Unfortunately, Trump lost that one. That's the only one he's lost so far, thankfully. And I think that on appeals, I think that one will be overturned because of the greater damage to society. When judges look at this stuff, they look at what's the greater damage to society. And I think that a loss of confidence by businesses and real estate people to be able to do business in New York is that loss of is that greater damage.
And the other thing to go with the railroading is that she was, I believe it was Letitia James. It could have been someone else that had said it that was on that team or whatever. But she was saying that we're not going to be going after other people or other businesses for what Trump has done. So if you're not,
that tells me that you're convicting one person, but you're holding them to an unequal standard of justice than you are other
exactly. You're going after them for the same crime that these people have committed, but you're not going to convict them.
Yeah, well, and let's talk about the other cases that she's let go. That the 8 illegal immigrants that attacked a police officer, and they were back out on the streets. She's not prosecuting the common criminal like she should. Instead, she's letting them go free, but she's taking someone that's a presidential candidate that represents 50% of the nation, and you're going to prosecute him that way? Yep. Here's the beautiful thing, and let me say this. I really think that this is the beautiful part about all this. With all of these unethical prosecutions, the support for Trump continues to grow. It continues to mount. I see people that were former Biden supporters. And yeah, you can make the same argument the other way, but I see people that were former Biden supporters that absolutely support Trump going forward because they see the injustice being done to him.
Yep.
So we talk about that case. Let's move on to Fani Willis and Nathan Wade. That's the Georgia case, the elections case there. Yeah. They were trying to try him for basically making a statement that said, find me 11,000 more votes instead of fabricate or concoct 11,000 more votes. They were trying to prosecute him. It's a stupid thing to prosecute him for. Election integrity does fall under the realm of presidential responsibility. He's the executive branch. And we're going to talk about checks and balances in a minute, or in a few minutes or on another episode. But anyway, so that case is coming unraveled. I watched the closing arguments on Friday. I think Trump and his team have made some great arguments. Do you know much about that case as far as I'm talking?
Not too much on it, no.
Have you heard about Fani Willis being investigated because she and Nathan Wade had a relationship prior to her hiring him?
No, I did not.
So what happened is basically there's a dispute about when their relationship started. This is why I don't date people I work with. This is why I've always stayed away from it, is because of the appearance of the appearance of some kind of ethical violation.
Yeah.
And as a prosecuting attorney, as a DA, you have a responsibility. You have a higher standard. You're holding other people to higher standards. You better be unapproachable in that regard to breaking the law or breaking ethics. And there are ethical codes that they have to abide by. So supposedly, the timing of their relationship, one of her former employees basically said it started in 2019. She said, no, it didn't start until after the Trump case started in like 2021. And so basically saying that she had hired him and then they had a relationship, not that she had a relationship and then hired him. So with that, what that means is that she could be reaping a financial benefit by hiring her lover, because now they go on vacations together. Like, he was going through a divorce at the time or whatever, but there's suspicion that they had a relationship while he was going through his divorce proceedings. His divorce attorney was brought in. The case, actually, there's usually attorney-client privilege. The judge said, hey, in regards to this relationship, that attorney-client privilege doesn't stand. So they had him testify. They had her friend testify. Fani Willis, did you hear about the payments between him and her?
No.
So basically, she would say, oh, I had cash and I just paid him back. So if Nathan paid for something, so let's go ahead and explain this a little further.
Yeah.
So she's getting a financial benefit because the person that she's dating has a job and is getting paid bonuses and things like that based on him prosecuting a case to help her. So since he's getting paid, it's a public office and a public position, so he's getting paid by the taxpayers. She cannot reap a financial benefit from that. So when he's taking her on vacations, he's taking her on vacations with money that he's earned from the taxpayer.
Yeah.
So, and don't get me wrong, he's got his own law practice as well, but for the things that he's prosecuting Trump for, he's incentivized to keep prosecuting Trump because he gets a financial benefit. That financial benefit is transferred to her if he takes her to the Caribbean. That benefit is transferred to her when he takes her up to Napa Valley. So things like that. Well, the way she debated that is she said, oh, well, when we went there, I paid him back in cash. And these are sums of money like $4,000. They're not sums of money like $400.
Just went to the ATM and casually took out $4,000 in cash.
Well, she said, well, my daddy always taught me to keep extra cash around the house. I'm pretty sure he didn't teach you to keep that much cash around the house because that's stupid. So she's like, well, I shouldn't be telling people how much I keep around the house because then they'll break in. So she's trying to protect herself from having to testify against herself. But throughout the course of the questioning, and I watched some of that too while I was doing cardio, throughout the course of that, she's basically like, well, I paid him in cash. I just kept it. And so her integrity is in question too, because if she's lying on that stand as a prosecuting attorney, as a DA, you can actually get disbarred for lying under oath.
Oh, wow.
So she's facing some professional consequences as well if she's found to be guilty, and she will be investigated for those just because it is a natural course of being brought to testify. So anyway, if let's say I give you cash for something, right? Like I give you cash to go purchase a car, or let's say I give you cash to go snowboarding. Let's say that I give you $500 and like, hey, go snowboarding. There are going to be receipts that you eventually have. Even if I gave you cash, you're going to go pay for the hotel. You're going to pay for the snowboard.
Yep.
You know what I mean? You're going to pay for things. She basically gave Nathan Wade cash, and then his testimony is, well, I just gave it to my kids and things like that. So he didn't deposit it, so there are no receipts anywhere.
Yeah.
Now, the burden of proof is on them to prove that if she received a financial benefit, there should have been receipts somewhere. She's in law. She should know that she should have receipts documenting that kind of stuff. And if she's violating ethics, she absolutely should know. So the thing is, cash is used to hide that kind of activity.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you say you're using cash and that you use cash for all those transactions, it's because you either didn't use cash or you're trying to hide something. Either way, you have ethical violations that do. We were talking about on the drive over here, preponderance of the evidence versus what was the other one? Preponderance of the evidence is greater than 50%. Without a shadow of doubt means you have to go all the way and convince the jury that, hey, this person's absolutely guilty of that. So for murder versus civil things. So usually with things where someone's going to have capital punishment or they're going to serve jail time, you have to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt. But with civil cases, like with what happened with Trump, you just have to prove 51%. You don't have to get all the way to 99% or 100%. You just have to get to 51%. So with this, in the arguments on Friday that were heard out, Trump's attorneys argued that all you need is the preponderance of the evidence. Fani's attorney argued, well, no, you actually need beyond a shadow of a doubt, so you need to prove it. Now, here's the thing. Hold on. That is up to the judge at the end of the day to decide. They both cited cases where preponderance of the evidence was enough, or there's another word. It's something to do with an appearance of impropriety. So if there's even an appearance of impropriety, there were some cases that were cited by both of them. The judge asked Trump's lawyers, he said, would you say that it's actually arbitrary and it's questionable about whether that's actually established about preponderance of the evidence? He said, I'm willing to give that in some cases, but here are some where it actually did pass that bar of just a preponderance of the evidence, and it didn't actually show that they were guilty of that event. And it's with the same thing. It's with challenging a DA or a prosecuting attorney. While Trump's attorneys were willing to give and say, yeah, you're right, it's not entirely clear, it hasn't been determined one way or the other, Fani's attorney, and this is where I think he made a mistake, he was not willing to budge. He said, absolutely not. It was proven it had to be proven beyond a shadow of a doubt, because there was the assumption of guilt, and then there was actually someone was guilty. Yeah. So he goes, and so the judge called him out for actually not giving any leniency in that and saying that there might be some confusion. He goes, well, Trump's attorney admitted that could be, it could be seen either way. You're telling me that it's not. And so he's going to decide in 2 weeks. He's going to come back to the court and make his decision on whether Fani is disqualified as a prosecuting attorney. If so, that will reset the clock on some activities, and then they'll have to prosecute Trump again.
Gotcha.
So, or I don't know, that they won't have time to prosecute him, so they won't get to. This is where liberals are pissed, man. I love it. Liberals are losing left and right in the last week. Yeah. And so this is the first case. We'll talk about the other case they lost earlier this week with Jack Smith in a moment. So that's where Fani Willis stands as of Friday. Now, Jack Smith is the document case. I want you to talk some. So let's go to Jack Smith in the documents case. Do you know what Trump is trying to claim with that one?
I don't know what he's trying to claim. I know what the situation, and they're trying to claim the differences between how Biden's was versus his.
So let's talk about Biden's. Go ahead. What's Biden's situation?
Well, Biden's was that his classified documents were that he held on to them for 10 years, and he had them just sitting in his garage, not locked up, not, safely protected, no security around it. It was just in his garage.
What were his positions in government that he had documents?
At that time, he was just a VP and a senator.
Are they classified documents?
I believe that they were classified.
They're absolutely
okay. I believe
I'm asking you questions so that we can let our audience know, because we have to let them know the details of this. So yeah.
But yeah, no, he left him in his garage, just let him sitting there,
Next
kind
to
of
his
thing.
Corvette.
Yeah, yeah.
You noticed the car because that's obviously your thing, but you're like, yeah, I was next to his vet.
Yeah, but no, I mean, I believe that also he had the person who was writing his biography also look at the classified documents as well, right?
So yeah, there's some statement on that as well. So basically, Biden kept the documents from when he was VP and senator, which means it's a less powerful position than what Trump held.
Yeah.
So if anything, he doesn't have. Trump was the executive. Biden was just a VP, so he's not even the executive. He's the guy that helps the executive. He may as well be a secretary. So anyway, but Biden kept his documents from his time as VP and senator. They were classified. They were in his garage. They were next to his vet. They were unsecured. Trump had his at Mar-a-Lago in a secure location, at least in filing cabinets, and had Secret Service and things like that. So he was negotiating back and forth. Biden held his documents for 10 years, like you stated.
And Trump only had him for one.
Exactly. That's how you know it's the setup, is the fact that they didn't ask Biden for 10 years.
No, exactly. They didn't ask Biden for 10 years. Also, after they had gotten Trump's, Biden's all like, oh, yeah, by the way, here, I have these over here that I've held for 10 years that you guys didn't question me about.
So it sounds like he's willingly handing them over, but the reality is, if I see you getting prosecuted for something, I'm not committing the same crime. And if I have, I'm going to be like, oh, no, I'm going to comply. Like, here you go. Like, I'm going to go along and make sure, yep, my compliance is everything. Yep. Your compliance isn't everything. You committed that crime.
Yeah.
So he did that. If it's a crime for Trump, it has to be a crime for him. But if it's not a crime for him, it shouldn't be a crime for Trump. Do you know what the special counsel for Biden found?
That he was not mentally there, basically. He's not mentally feasible to
prosecute.
To be prosecuted.
So there is a mental requirement for being able to understand the charges brought against you. And so they were trying to say that that he was just a nice old man with a bad memory. And so
this man's running our country now.
Yeah, exactly. So the man's running the country, and he's running for election in 2024. Now, let me say this. While we talk about Biden, I don't hate him. I don't dislike him.
No.
I think he is an old man that has passed his time, that he shouldn't be there. Even Democrats are upset that Biden is running. They want someone else that is younger that they think could beat Trump soundly. So they're worried that now you have two men that are in their late 70s, early 80s that are competing for the position. And when you look at the scales, they think that it tips in Trump's favor a little more, especially because of the immigration issue that's so hot right now. They're trying to create some of the same chaos they did in 2020. They're trying to create some of that here in 2024.
Well, the thing I see is the reason I dislike Biden. The reason I dislike him is because he was in office. He was a senator for 47 years, VP for 8 years, and now has been president for 3.5 years. What has he accomplished in his 50-plus years of government?
Well, let's say this. They try to cite that. I haven't looked back at his list of accomplishments, but I would say if you've been there for 47 years, you've probably done things. And this is where I say there's some bias that I try to wash out.
Yeah.
So I think that if you were, excuse me. So I think you can dislike Biden. You can dislike him for his policies that he's doing now.
Well,
and during your lifetime. And I'm not going to say that you can't dislike him for the policies he did during his lifetime, because back in the 70s, he was all about segregation.
Yep, that's what I was about to bring up. Segregation. He was about
racism.
Yep.
And he was friends with the KKK. They talk about Trump having friends like David Duke, and it's like, bro, Biden had some of his own, and as a matter of fact, one of them was the Grand Dragon.
Yeah.
So, that's why I say you can't weigh them on what they did 50 years ago, because humans evolve as we get older. We get better. You're going to be different 20 years from now than you are today. So to hold them to the same standard that they were doing in the 70s, you're looking at 50 years ago. You can't do that. They both changed who they were. They became better people. Trump rose to power. He's done a lot of things where it hasn't been racist, but they still try to harken back to the racist things of the 70s for Trump, but they ignore the racist things for Biden, or the racist things Trump says today versus the racist things Biden says today. And the reality is, anytime you're talking to race, people get delicate about the way they want you to say something. You don't get to choose how somebody says something. So don't look at what they said. Look at how they said it and what their intent was behind that. Like Biden saying, if you don't vote for me, you're not black. And then Trump said something the other day about black Americans as well at one of the rallies. And I was like, could you word that better? This is where I say, and so liberals seized on that to call him a racist, but then they didn't call Biden a racist for saying the same kind of stuff. I'm like, hey, listen, either they're both racist or neither are racist, and they both said something that wasn't entirely the way you want it to be said when they're speaking about other races, whether it's black, Mexican, Asian, or whatever. We all say things and we expect things to be perfect, but the problem is, I mean, we're on mic now, so we have things that are recorded that, when you're live, you're trying to think of things, and you see me sometimes, I'm like looking at my notes, or I'm like scrambling in my head going, okay, well, how do I respond to that? Same thing with them. So they're not going to word it correctly every time. That's why I don't judge them based on that. I judge them based on their policies.
Yeah.
Because we can all make slip-ups. That's like Joy Reid from MSNBC. Did you hear about her slip-up recently?
No, I didn't.
So she was criticizing Biden. I forget what she said, but she said something to the effect of, are you fucking kidding me? Like with whatever he did. But it was a hot mic.
On live.
She didn't expect them to catch it. Oh, man, it made airwaves really fast, made it circles. So that's why I say I can't hold people to a standard of perfection on the mic because they're in the public eye 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
I'm not perfect in private life. So I can't imagine how much harder it is to be perfect in public life.
Yeah.
So back to the Jack Smith case, because we have gotten a little bit off of that. So what Trump is trying to declare about the Jack Smith case is presidential immunity. We're going to try to rush through these next 3 cases, so we won't touch on every point of it. Basically, the first court said he didn't have presidential immunity. The D.C. Court of Appeals said he didn't have presidential immunity. The problem with that is they're both Democrat-led courts. So he's now appealed it to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court got this, I think, back in December, like late December or something like that, to determine whether they were going to hear the case or not. Now, I think what the Supreme Court did was very strategic. They don't really want to rule on this. They want the voters to decide, because when I heard them speak about other elements of Trump being disqualified from the ballot, they talked about disenfranchising voters. And they look at that as the most important thing. You cannot disenfranchise voters.
Yep.
So he's talking about presidential immunity. Do you have absolute immunity when you're president? In my mind, I don't think so.
No.
But I also don't think you can be prosecuted for doing things in the line of duty. So if, for instance, when he killed, let's talk about, damn it, it's not Abu. Soleimani? Soleimani. When he delivered a missile to the guy's lap while he was riding around in his limo.
Yeah.
I mean, if you technically wanted to, you could prosecute him for that, because that's murder, right?
Yeah.
But here's something that's even, I would say it's on a level of similar importance in terms of being an executive and being the executive branch. And we'll talk about checks and balances later. But election integrity matters.
Yeah.
So you should be able to question that. Presidential documents, those matter because they are important, but he was in the process of negotiation. And I saw something the other day. It was a White House press conference. And so they had the special counsel for Biden speaking. And basically the guy said, well, something was said about the documents for Bush and Clinton and things like that. He goes, well, we haven't done that for the last 50 years. What he didn't realize is it was a slip up to say, it was a slip up, and it equated to they haven't done that with Trump either, or they decided to do it to Trump arbitrarily, even though they hadn't done it to previous presidents.
Yeah.
So Trump is the first president they decided to do that, which is a sure sign that they were trying to railroad him. As soon as Pence and Biden heard that they were prosecuting Trump, they're like, well, I'm not getting prosecuted, so they turned theirs over. That's the legal process of what happened, or the legal steps of what happened in terms of that evolution. If you see someone getting prosecuted, you're not going to do it. So Trump's arguing presidential immunity. I think that you have to have presidential immunity for most things. Like I said, I don't agree with it on all things, but I do agree with it on most things. The D.C. court tried to equate it to, well, if I wanted to, as Biden right now, I could kill my presidential opponent. But that's not the same level as what you're talking about with presidential documents. Those are 2 different levels.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's where that sits right now. It sits with the Supreme Court. Liberals are crying. I love it. The Supreme Court waited until now to decide whether or not they were going to take it. So a lot of the legal experts on MSNBC and CNN thought that meant they weren't going to take it. And then when they took it, they were like, why would you wait till now? So, oh man, it has been beautiful to see MSNBC and CNN lately. And then they now realize, because here's what the Supreme Court did. They could have said, well, we can expedite the hearing and do it in the next couple of weeks or the next month. They're like, we're going to do April 22nd. Pushing it out 2 months, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that made them so mad. They're like, so you're going to delay that, which means by the time you rule after that, it may not be June until we get the results of that. So it may be 4 months before they even rule on presidential immunity. The fact that they took it means that they probably don't agree with the D.C. District Court's ruling that you don't have presidential immunity.
Yeah.
So they want to clarify it, and that's why the Supreme Court usually takes a case. If they had agreed with the D.C. Court, they would have been like, we're not going to do it.
Yeah.
So that's why liberals are losing their shit about it, if you want to know. But if you want to have fun, go watch, Google any YouTube video of MSNBC talking about the Supreme Court taking the ruling. I've had fun watching those the last few days.
So I know that there have been 3 states that are trying to remove Trump from the ballot.
They're trying to disqualify him.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that. So there is another case before the Supreme Court.
Yep.
You're right. So Denver, what are the other two? Maine,
Denver, Illinois, I think it was.
Denver, Maine, and Illinois, right?
Yeah.
So the Supreme Court's hearing the Denver case. They're ready to rule on that. I listened to the Supreme Court speaking on that as well. You know, I try to listen to source data. Even the liberal judges were grilling the attorney for Denver.
Yeah.
So, or for Colorado rather. So they were grilling them saying, hey, you're going to disenfranchise voters by doing this, because the attorney's argument was, oh, well, Trump tried to disenfranchise voters, so he did commit insurrection. So this actually goes back to the January 6th stuff we were talking about earlier. They're trying to tie it back to January 6th and arbitrarily decide that the president is guilty of insurrection, even though nobody has been found guilty of insurrection. So if nobody's been found guilty of insurrection, they've been found guilty of rioting and civil disorder.
Yes.
How can you prosecute this man for insurrection and expect that to stick? And so all three of them are relying on that clause in Section 14, in Article 14, Section 3, that basically talk about insurrection.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court's going to rule on that soon, but from the sound of it, it sounds like the liberals are going to lose that, which will be beautiful music to my ears when I go look at MSNBC again.
So say the Supreme Court rules that they can't take them off the ballot. What happened? And obviously that's just for the state of Colorado at the moment. Does that now, obviously that sets a precedent, but how does that affect the Illinois and Maine removing him from the ballot? Do they have to
They have to reestablish him and put him back on the ballot, because now a Supreme Court precedent has been set.
That's what I was going to ask, is if it now has to go, both of those have to come to the Supreme Court as well, and they have to rule on it again, or is it just that they now have to get rid of it?
They now have to put him back on the ballot, and they technically should put him on the ballot. Illinois is trying to remove him from the primary ballot. Can't do that either. And here's what's happened with talking about getting removed from the ballot. You have certain states like Nevada that could have primaried or caucused. Nevada was supposed to be a primary, but Democrats set some rules where they would have had some influence on the primary. So Republicans said, well, fuck you, we're going to caucus then.
Yeah.
And so Trump won like 99% of that vote. Nikki Haley got beaten by none of those on her ballot. Like, she only had her and like two other people, and it wasn't Trump. 63% to like 30%, I think.
Voted none of the above.
Voted none of the above candidates. So she got smoked on both the primary and the caucus, but Democrats were trying to manipulate the other party's ballot. Like, you can't do that. You can't. I mean, that's why you have separate primaries, is so you can determine who your candidate's going to be at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So taking that, though, that is with the Supreme Court as well now. I'd forgotten about that case being up there, but it sounds like they're going to rule in Trump's favor on that as well. When I listened to it, I mean, even Ketanji Jackson dug into, like, she went in hard on the attorney for Colorado and talking about disenfranchising voters. She goes, you're talking about disenfranchising voters, but that's exactly what this does.
Yeah.
So let the voters decide. I think let the voters decide is the way the Supreme Court's going to lean on any case that comes before it at this point.
Yeah.
They didn't take cases in 2020. They kind of went with what the voters decided. And I think here they're doing the same thing. And this time it favors Trump. In 2020, it favored Biden.
Yep.
So there's that case before the courts, and good timing, because that was actually the thing that was on there. And then let's move to Trump and elections. Obviously, he's got Nikki Haley that he's competing with. Other people have dropped out. Vivek dropped out. DeSantis dropped out. So we'll kind of go through this quickly because it's a long segment, but I also want to make sure this is a shorter segment. But with that, let me ask this. Do you think Nikki Haley should drop out now?
At this point, I mean, her going forward is just, it's non-beneficial to her. I mean, she's been losing every state that she's been trying to go against. Like you said, in Nevada, she lost 63% to none of the above.
Yeah.
Which is a ridiculous amount, basically, to not want to vote for you, even though you're one of the only 3 people on the ballot.
Yeah.
At this point, she just needs to drop out. It's not beneficial to her. She's just kind of, at this point, not benefiting anyone, not benefiting the Republican Party and it's just hurting, technically, I guess, Trump at this point.
So now let me tell you why I don't think she should drop out. I think she should go as long as she wants to. I think she's campaigning for 2028. That's 1. 2, I think that this is healthy competition. I think, if anything, it helps Trump solidify his case that, hey, I can beat everybody. Now, if she drops out of the thing, then you don't get to see how dominant Trump is.
True.
So she's at least going to stay through Super Tuesday. After Super Tuesday, she said she's going to hang on anyway. I think by Super Tuesday, she's done. I think her donors pull out because there's no road to victory for her. And Trump may actually, there are 17 states happening on March 5th, which is Super Tuesday.
Yeah.
2 days away from today. I don't see any way that she wins any of those states. And I think after that, her donors drop off. There's D.C. today. I think North Dakota's tomorrow. So you're looking at 19 states or 19 states or districts over the next 2 days.
Yeah.
So just let it play out. Let it see where it lands. And if she wants to continue, I'm okay with that because I see it as campaigning for 2028, saying, hey, I stood in against Trump and I took my hits. I took the blows.
It is pretty good.
And I think on top of that, it also takes a little bit of the Democrat pressure on Trump because if Nikki pulls out, then all of a sudden Democrats can go all in on Trump. So
Fair enough.
it's delayed some of that. So I think there's some advantages to her staying on the ballot, even if she's gotten her ass whipped in every state. Let me go through the stats. New Hampshire was 54.3% voted for Trump. But again, independents and Democrats kind of swayed that because they were involved in that. And that's only like 3 electoral votes anyway, so it doesn't matter. Then you have South Carolina where she got the shit trounced out of her, 59% to 39%. Nevada, on the caucus, she wasn't in it, so it was 99% to Trump. And then on the primary, like you said, it was 63%, none of the above, to 30% for Nikki. And then Michigan was 68% to 26% in favor of Trump. And Missouri just finished the caucus was 100% Trump. I mean, I think it was like 99.1%. I'm like, who is the asshole?
Who was that one person?
If I read it, I may have been the asshole. I'd have been like, all right.
The one person in Iowa.
And so you look through that and you see that. The other thing I want to say is Trump is winning. And for someone who's not currently president in a primary, he's winning at record numbers for a Republican candidate throughout the primary season. Liberal media continues to paint that as, oh, he's barely winning. No, he's kicking the shit out of her when you're winning by those big margins, and we'll see what happens on Tuesday, obviously.
Yeah.
But liberal media is going to do whatever they can to say, oh, well, Trump might not be able to beat Biden. Damn it. And so
Tongue twister.
I know, right? And so, so anyway, they're trying to paint it as that. They're like, oh, well, there's a certain percentage of the population that's voting against Trump that's Republican that might vote for Biden. Well, yeah, we call those rhinos.
Yeah.
They're a very small percentage, but they're at the extreme right that lean left.
Yeah.
So, and then in the same way, though, what they're not stating is the percentage that are not voting for Biden or that have said they will not vote for Biden. Biden has one of the lowest approval ratings right now, and especially low because of the economy and because of immigration. Now, immigration's his number one issue. The economy's not far behind with inflation. He hasn't gotten that under control. You still have high interest rates. So there are things that are going to impact him running into the election. We still have a lot of runway left before we get to the election. I am concerned for Trump, especially with all of it. Listen, we've seen some things that the Democrats have pulled out over the last 2 years.
Yep.
This isn't the whole of their arsenal. They have some more weapons that are coming over the next, we're at March now, so you're looking at 8 months away.
Yep.
Between now and November 5th, they're going to pull out all the stops, mail-in ballots, anything they can do to manipulate the election. In 2020, they rigged the election like discreetly with riots, causing chaos and mayhem is the way they did it. Listen, even if they didn't rig the votes or whatever, I've talked to you about the statistics of how you could do that. People think you needed millions of votes. No, you just needed tens of thousands in the right place. And so with that, they did rig it by basically creating so much chaos with the mail-in ballots and the ballot harvesting that they did.
Oh, yeah.
They can't act like they didn't do ballot harvesting, man. Yeah. And so you don't need millions of votes to beat Trump in 2020. What you needed was tens of thousands in the right place.
Yep.
And so the same thing here. If we think that they pulled out all the stops, they haven't pulled out all the stops yet. These are the initial things they were trying to do to prevent Trump. They tried to time it so that it would happen running into the election and he would get disqualified late so that Biden could then go in without any real challenger. Because then if you look at it now, let's say Trump gets convicted now and can't compete, right?
Yeah.
Let's say insurrection, whatever. Now all you have are Nikki Haley, DeSantis, and Vivek.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Nobody that's a strong contender to Biden.
Yep.
Nobody that could unseat him. And so they would win by de facto.
Yeah.
But the fact that they can't unseat him, they were hoping this would win. Now that it hasn't, they have backup. They have contingency plans.
Oh, I'm sure they do.
And they'll have them all the way until November. So it's very imperative that we as Republicans, we as conservatives, stay very vigilant and that we continue to pay attention to what's happening and we make sure that we get the message out for Trump and for conservatives because our values are at stake. We want a say in the government. And right now, Democrats are controlling a lot of those segments. So we're trying to take back some of that control and we're trying to balance it out more. And we'll talk about checks and balances later.
Yep.
But with that, let's wrap this up. I'm C1.
And I'm C2.
And this is
The Christopher Show.
The Pixel Lounge. Located in San Diego, the Pixel Lounge provides you with creator space for content creation for podcasts, photo shoots, interviews, and more. If you're interested, the link for the studio is in the description below. Click it and book your session today. The Merchant Card Group. If your business needs payment processing services, hit me up and I'll give you a referral code. With my referral code, send them your statement, and if they can't beat your current cost, they will give you $250. That's how confident they are that they can beat your cost. You can reach me at CA Glennon on Instagram or at 619-249-9328.